This week, we explore the complex relationship between art and censorship. Throughout history, images have been at the heart of power struggles, used as propaganda, vilified as threats, or even erased entirely. In modern times, artists have pushed back against institutional control, often risking livelihood or safety in order to express unpopular truths. We'll examine how political regimes, religious authorities, and even social media algorithms enforce boundaries on expression. But censorship isn't always overt. Sometimes it's subtle, through funding decisions, community standards, or algorithmic suppression. The goal this week is to consider who decides what's acceptable, what gets silenced, and how artists can fight back. We've already examined AYY's Remembering. In 2009, AYY covered the facade of the Haus der Kunst in Munich with 9,000 school backpacks. The arrangement spelled out a sentence from a grieving mother which said, "She lived happily on this earth for 7 years." Her daughter was one of thousands killed when a poorly built school collapsed during the 2008 Sichuan earthquake. A used this massive installation to call out government corruption and censorship. The backpacks, which are symbols of childhood, transform into a haunting tribute and a bold act of protest. Remembering demands accountability while honoring the voices that officials tried to silence. It's grief turned public and political. Censorship has existed for centuries, long before photography or digital media. In ancient societies, rulers commissioned idealized images while banning works that questioned their authority. During the Reformation, iconoclasts destroyed religious images, fearing that they encouraged idolatry. Artists have always had to navigate the line between expression and repression. In some cases, the mere act of creating art was a risk. In others, regimes used art as a weapon. They tried to control and reinforce the ideology or religious dogma of their choice. Understanding these historical roots helps us to recognize modern censorship not as an anomaly, but a continuation of power dynamics. The 1937 Degenerate Art Exhibition in Nazi Germany was one of the most infamous moments of state-sponsored censorship in modern history. The Nazi regime labeled modernist works, particularly those by Jewish, queer, or avant-garde artists, as corrupting influences on German culture. These works were mocked and removed from museums and in many cases destroyed. Meanwhile, Hitler promoted a sanitized classical aesthetic to represent his fascist ideals. This exhibition wasn't just about art. It was about weaponizing culture to reinforce a totalitarian vision of racial purity and nationalism. Picasso's Guernica is one of the most powerful anti-war artworks of the 20th century. Painted in response to the bombing of a Basque town by Nazi planes, the piece was a searing indictment of fascism. So threatening was its imagery that it was hidden from public view in Spain until after Franco's death. In 2003, a tapestry replica at the United Nations was covered during a press conference justifying the Iraq War, as it was considered too disturbing. The fact that Guernica still provokes censorship decades later speaks to its enduring visual power. Robert Mapplethorpe's photography challenged American norms around sex, gender, and beauty. His 1989 exhibition, The Perfect Moment, included explicit images of gay male sexuality, and it sparked a national firestorm. Conservative politicians attacked the NEA for funding his work, leading to broader debates about morality, public money, and artistic freedom. What made Mapplethorpe's case pivotal was not just the content, It was how the controversy exposed deep anxieties about queerness, identity, and who gets to define cultural values. In 1933, Diego Rivera was commissioned to paint a mural at Rockefeller Center in New York. The piece, titled Man at the Crossroads, aimed to depict humanity's scientific and industrial progress. But Rivera's inclusion of Lenin, a prominent communist figure, sparked outrage from the Rockefellers. Despite Rivera's insistence on artistic freedom, the mural was destroyed before it was completed. This incident highlights the tension between patronage and expression and how censorship can come from the very institutions that first support the work. Rivera's destroyed mural lives on in reproductions and reminds us that art and politics are always intertwined. Iranian-born artist Shirin Neshat explores themes of gender, faith, and politics in her work. Her 1990s photo series, Women of Allah, presents veiled women with calligraphic inscriptions on their skin, often holding weapons. These images challenge both Western stereotypes of Islamic women and internal norms within Iran. Her work has been banned in Iran, and she lives in exile. Despite this, Neshat's photography has been globally exhibited, reminding us that censorship doesn't always silence, it can also amplify voices by drawing attention to repression. Chris O'Feely's 1996 painting, The Holy Virgin Mary, became infamous after its inclusion in the Sensation exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum in 1999. The artwork depicted a black Madonna surrounded by cutouts of female genitalia and included elephant dung as a material. Then Mayor Rudy Giuliani called it sick and threatened to pull funding from the museum. The museum sued the city and won. O'Feely's work challenges Eurocentric representations of religious figures and pushes boundaries around materials and reverence. This controversy exposed the fragile boundary between cultural offense and the freedom of expression. Iranian filmmaker Jafar Panahi has faced repeated arrests and bans for films critical of the Iranian regime. After being banned from making films for 20 years, he secretly made This Is Not a Film in 2011 and smuggled it out of Iran in a USB drive hidden in a cake. This meta documentary shows Panahi trapped in his home narrating an unrealized script. It's a powerful act of defiance, one that highlights how censorship can be resisted with ingenuity. Panahi's story reminds us that resistance through art doesn't always require a massive platform. Sometimes a whisper cuts louder than a shout. David Wojnarowicz's work in the 1980s addressed AIDS, queerness, and the political neglect with raw urgency. His multimedia work, A Fire in My Belly, was pulled from the Smithsonian in 2010 after complaints from conservative groups. They objected to an 11-second clip of ants crawling on a crucifix. The removal sparked national protests about censorship and queer visibility. Wojnarowicz, who died of AIDS-related illness in 1992, had warned about this suppression in his lifetime. His work remains a rallying cry, not just for those silenced by illness, but for any artist marginalized by institutional fear. In 1989, artist Dred Scott displayed an artwork outside the Art Institute of Chicago that featured an American flag on the floor titled, What is the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag? Visitors were invited to write responses in a ledger, but to do so they had to step on the flag. This work triggered outrage from veterans groups, politicians, and eventually President George H.W. Bush. Scott became the subject of Senate hearings, and the piece ignited debates about patriotism, protest, and the limits of expression. His work continues to provoke, but also to educate, forcing viewers to confront the weight of national symbols. Recent years have seen a wave of statue removals, Confederate generals, colonial leaders, and figures tied to oppression. Artists like Keyhind Wiley responded with works such as Rumors of War, a towering equestrian statue of a young black man in streetwear. The piece mimics traditional monuments while reclaiming space. This isn't classic censorship, it's counter-narrative. By challenging who is remembered and how, these gestures ask, what stories do public spaces tell and who gets to tell them? It's a new form of civic expression that replaces bronze and stone with questions and reckoning. Cuban performance artist Tania Bruguera has been arrested, harassed, and surveilled for using art to provoke civic dialogue. Her works, like Tatlin's Whisper No. 6, invite citizens to speak freely at a podium for 1 minute, guarded by fake soldiers. In Cuba, this type of expression is revolutionary. Her repeated arrests show how authoritarian states fear even symbolic speech. Bruguera doesn't just talk about freedom, she stages it. Her performances dissolve the line between art and activism, making the audience complicit in either silence or defiance. Jenny Holzer uses LED signs, projections, and public text to question authority. Her truisms, cryptic, often contradictory statements, have been removed, altered, or shut down in cities for being too provocative. Works like Protect Me from What I Want and Abuse of Power Comes as No Surprise offer biting commentary on politics and control. Unlike traditional censorship, Holzer's suppression often comes through quiet redirection, funding cuts, venue changes, or unspoken discomfort. Still, her texts persist, glowing defiantly in unexpected places. The anonymous London street artist Banksy's street art often appears without permission, which makes it inherently oppositional. His politically charged works on the West Bank barrier in Palestine drew global attention and fierce criticism. While the pieces humanized the conflict for many, others accused him of trivializing suffering. Local governments and property owners frequently erase his art, despite its immense cultural value. Ironically, erasure becomes part of the work's life cycle. For Banksy, censorship is not an obstacle, it's a collaborator. As we conclude our exploration of censorship and controversy in art, remember this: every act of silencing is also an act of shaping. What's removed from public view still casts a shadow. Artists have long challenged these boundaries, not just by provoking, but by inviting society to examine who gets to decide what is appropriate or offensive. Whether it's a banned book, a defunded mural, or a statue torn down, each moment of conflict reveals a deeper tension about culture, power, and expression. The role of the artist isn't simply to decorate or entertain, but to question, confront, and expand what's possible to say and see. As you move forward, think about what you would defend or oppose if the artwork in question challenged your own beliefs. The conversation isn't over. You're part of it now.